Oh, okay, now I think we're live. Welcome, everyone. Just give it a moment for everybody to settle in. Thank you very much for attending this Q&A session today. My name is Colleen Graham, and I'm the Director of Communications, Engagement, and Marketing with the City of Medicine Hat. And today we're here to discuss the possibility of transitioning our distribution and electric generation energy governance to a municipally controlled corporation, otherwise known as an MCC, with a rate review committee. So thank you all for joining us today. We do have the MCC project team on the session, and I'm going to introduce them a little bit, but I want to go through a little bit what the session is going to look like today. And I also just did want to talk about, this is certainly the first time I have been part of Microsoft Teams town hall. So forgive us as we, attempt to navigate this technology for the first time. I'll be moderating today's session. The project team will be answering all of your questions. So I do want to talk a little bit about why we're here and how the session will work. So the project team is going to start us off shortly. They're going to share a little bit of information, and then we'll move into questions. Today's Q&A session is really part of a broader public effort to ensure our community has had a chance to become informed about the proposed changes to our city's energy business. We've been sharing a lot of information on our Shape Your City website, via council meetings, and on our social media platforms about these proposed changes. And we're hopeful that all of you that are online today have had the opportunity to review some of that material in advance. Because what we're really trying to do is prepare our residents with information so that when the time comes for official feedback, which will be at a public hearing on June 24th, residents feel like they have adequate information to provide informed feedback via that process. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the public hearing at the end of the session, once the questions have wrapped up, so that that information is fresh in your mind. But I think right now, I'd like to just introduce the project team. So we have Rochelle Pancoast, Managing Director of Energy, Land and Environment. Ben Bullock is with us. He's our city solicitor. And we have Matt Clausen, who's a solicitor within the city solicitor's office. Lola Barda, our Director of Finance, is here today. Travis Tuchscher is our Director of Energy Marketing and Business Analysis. And last but not least, we have Tori Coombs, who is serving as the project manager for this effort. So this is the project team that's leading the discussion around these proposed changes. So the team is going to provide a few opening remarks, and then all of you as participants will have an opportunity to submit your questions via the question and answer feature that you'll be able to see, should be on the side panel there. I'll monitor the questions as they come in and do my best to direct them to the appropriate project team member. And I do just want to offer a reminder to the group, we really hope you keep the questions respectful. Anything that, is unintelligible or profane or disrespectful, we may not put through to the project team. So just want to keep that reminder or put that reminder in front of everyone. So with that, I think I've covered everything that I needed to. So I think we're ready to get started. The project team is going to start by providing some opening remarks, and we'll turn it over to Rochelle.
Thank you, Colleen. And we recognize that there's probably an opportunity to refresh some of the content. I'll try to do that as quickly as possible because it is complex. We only have planned for the hour, possibility to extend if possible, but planned for the hour. But we will try to refresh a little bit in this complex area. So high level, what would change if we introduced a municipally controlled corporation and rate review committee if they were established, subject to council's decision in those areas? Ultimately, as we've provided through the disclosure documents and the previous presentation, there would be no change to the jurisdiction or franchise areas that the energy business already covers. We don't anticipate any changes to the one utility bill that is provided by the city for our customers that has both distribution, commodity, and the environmental utilities on there as well. We also don't anticipate any significant market impacts because there aren't changes to who the service providers are, except for in name. What we do anticipate, however, is a change to the governance model. Today, council wears 3 hats as a decision maker, one representing the typical represented council approach on behalf of municipal services to make sure that we're using our property taxes wisely at the public purse, as they say, and directing that public purse appropriately across municipally provided services. The second is to wear the regulator hat to protect the interests of the ratepayers for utilities. And the third is the energy business hat to act in the best interest of the energy business, recognizing the energy business expands beyond our municipal board boundary and into areas including Redcliffe and parts of Cypress County, as well as imports and exports through our electric generation into the province of Alberta with sales and purchases there as well. So the governance model that we are proposing, together with what had been recommended by our third-party independent consultant, KPMG, is to separate those hats and actually reserve council for the true municipal service provision, introduce a skill-based board under its own company for the energy business, and also to introduce skill-based members of a rate review committee who would protect interests of the ratepayer. And the MCC would be an autonomous entity. However, it would be 100% owned by the city, and all resulting dividends from the MCC would be returned to the city, with a number of check and balance provisions of making sure that the MCC is acting in the best interest of the city along the way. So that is the primary change of what it would occur, is that governance level. Hopefully at the customer level, that would all be behind the scenes and not directly impact, for instance, the single utility bill as an example. So perhaps moving into why we're interested in doing this, I'll share that ultimately our strategic context is changing, where we have been the gas city and we have been selling natural gas quite profitably over decades, longer than a century now. That story has shifted, where we are actually producing a very small fraction of what we used to. And in whole, our natural gas production business is actually cash negative because we are heavy into cleanup and closure of wells. And that means instead of having a surplus of funding supporting the city and in a sense subsidizing the municipal side of the city, we're actually having to produce costs and start spending in that area. The electric side is a little bit different. It has recently produced some strong dividends. However, that future is also expected to change. We're facing significant regulatory pressures, mostly related to decarbonization, but also the broader energy transition consideration. So together with significant forecast spend for regular maintenance of our assets in the next 10 years, we are anticipating the need possibly to spend towards energy transition. That is funding that the City of Medicine Hat may not have the capability to deliver long-term. So we face a challenging future for the energy business with or without the MCC. And the MCC is something that has been proposed as offering additional tools, skill sets, access to financing, and other opportunities to help give us the extra edge we need in an increasingly complex area that's very difficult to keep up with, even as long-term people in the industry and dedicated people, let alone a council who may change every 4 years and may or may not bring the skill sets to the table to know what we need to be doing, how we need to be moving forward, and how to critique what staff might be up to in this area. So the proposal is to introduce a skill-based board in lieu of council to really focus on the needs of the energy business and look to do that energy business really well. Because if we get that wrong and we aren't able to be sustainable as an energy business, ultimately that means a couple of things. We're at risk of not providing that service locally long-term, and or we're at risk of having to start subsidizing the business in order to keep providing delivery of those services, and that would be at the cost of taxpayers. That's something we're really wanting to avoid, and that's why staff have recommended looking at this option to give us all the tools we can to make the right decisions on really complex areas to help this business succeed and to succeed well, with dividends still coming back to the city where council can reallocate those profits as needed. In terms of what's next, we do have the public hearing on the 24th at 4 p.m. Council will weigh that feedback together with everything they've heard from KPMG and from staff related to this project. And they will need to determine, do they proceed? Do they not proceed? Do they pause? Do they have a different decision around this? If they do choose to proceed, it would take roughly a year to implement. We would require a budget amendment because there would be one-time costs for the transition, as well as some ongoing costs related to paying for the skill-based board, as an example, amongst other detailed items that we've identified. And we would look to start creating the new corporation and shifting the various elements over. There is also an appeal period if council was to make that decision. And of course, there's an upcoming election, and any future council can choose to adjust that decision or even unwind that decision entirely. So lots of uncertainty, but the first step is the public hearing and council looking to make some form of a decision from there. Details for the public hearing are here, specifically 4 p.m. on Tuesday. Some people have asked why it's not at the normal 6:30 time. Often we do reserve time before the 6:30 for any closed content if we have that requirement. In this case, we are dedicating that evening to the public hearing, so we are able to start at 4 o'clock and continue for as long as the public is interested in sharing feedback. And that does include the option for written submissions before June 17th. And if we do receive written submissions before June 17th, that will be included in council's agenda for that evening. And individuals can choose to do that and or attend publicly as well, to come down to the podium and state their name and state whether they're for or against, and any context as to why. You can find additional material at our website, and we do also have a Shape Your City site dedicated to this, where there is extra material. You can find past presentations there. You can find information, including our disclosure documents that we have shared. We are also looking to answer online Q&A through that avenue, and we will look to increase our population of that section in coming days to make sure that that's available for people along the way. So do please keep checking back to that site for any updates.
Okay,
We're over to you, Colleen, in case there's any questions that may start coming through.
we don't have any questions submitted through the question feature yet.
And for anybody who is online, that there is a Q&A section at the top of your ribbon. That's where you can go enter questions. And we are happy to do what we can to provide answers as we know them today. Obviously, we're at the stage where we've created the blueprint of what it could look like. We don't have 100% of the answers. Some of those answers might come through as we would be in the implementation execution phase to make sure we've got some of those details. But we're happy to answer questions should anyone submit them. Maybe while we're waiting for some questions, we perhaps can identify some of the frequently asked questions that we have been hearing through the drop-in Q&A that we had at Helen Benny the other day, and other questions that we've even been hearing from staff and the community along the way. One of the questions, for instance, relates to what's going to happen to my rates. Aren't they going to skyrocket because we have an MCC who is ultimately a monopoly within our jurisdiction? And without the protection of council, won't they go through the roof? Won't they be unhindered? The answer is no. That's precisely why we've also opted to introduce or propose the introduction of a rate review committee. Ultimately, the rate review committee would be the regulator delegated by council, who's the regulator today, but with skill-based abilities to look at the submission of proposed rates that the MCC would put forward for regulated rates. They would have a chance to review that with scrutiny with a trained eye in order to identify if they have concerns, if they should be pushing back on any areas on behalf of the ratepayers' interests. And we're proposing that rate review committee would have more of an enhanced public engagement opportunity beyond the typical couple of minutes of come down and say if you're for and against the rates. Much closer to what we see as the provincial regulator, the Alberta Utilities Commission. So they would make sure that our local rates are fully appropriate and not unnecessarily inflated. And of course, the MCC also has the opportunity to compete within the deregulated market outside of the city through our imports and exports from GenCo, our electric generation area. And the MCC would be motivated to keep costs as low as possible in order to be able to compete and increase our sales and move forward on that basis. So the checks and balances between the rate review committee, making sure that the ratepayer interests are protected locally, and the MCC is by design, and one that works at the provincial level today with other MCCs with a comparable regulator in place.
Rochelle, we do have a few questions rolling in
Sure.
now, so I'll maybe start with the first one. And I think perhaps either you or Matt would be appropriate to answer this one. So the first question is, sorry about that. Where could some of the skills-based board members come from? For example, would they need to be local or from companies across Alberta?
I can start and perhaps Matt can supplement. Ideally, we would have people who would be familiar with the City of Medicine Hat's interests and needs and recognize what the community is about. However, we do also recognize that might not be possible to get the complete set of skills that might be desirable to make decisions in this area, whether it's for the MCC or the rate review committee. And that's why we've purposely identified the opportunity to have 2 council members represented on the MCC board, as well as 2 council members and a non-voting community member to be represented on the rate review committee. And that's precisely to make sure that local influence is heard and understood before decisions are made. Matt, do you have anything to add there?
Thank you, Rochelle. You summarized it well.
Okay, thank you. We do have a second question. So what specific skills are we seeking? Do we have a short list of former energy CEOs?
So we do have an articulated list of skills, and I might perhaps look to Matt to rattle them off once he confirms them. We aren't necessarily looking for past CEOs of energy businesses, but those certainly would be appropriate to consider. Really, it's about finding the mix of skills who can collectively draw on their past experiences and their skill sets to collectively help guide and govern the MCC, and similar for the rate review committee. So the types of skill sets that you would look for in an energy business and a rate review committee, and hopefully Matt has those. I could rattle them off, but Matt can probably confirm them at his fingertips.
Sure. Thank you, Rochelle. Yes, as noted, we're looking for a mix of skills. And so we're recommending that individuals with backgrounds among accounting, business strategy, legal, corporate finance, and especially utility businesses, project management and engineering, commodity markets and risk, and in utility and environmental regulatory areas be sought out.
Okay, thank you both. We do have another question here. Give me one moment. This one I think is best directed to you, Lola. So the power plant is currently covering losses in the gas production division, but the gas production unit is not in the MCC. How will operating losses or conversely abandonment costs be handled, and will it be by taxpayers?
Okay, thanks, Colleen. So as per the KPMG recommendation, one of the recommendations in that report was that we look at how do we reduce or mitigate some of the losses in our gas production business unit. One of the recommendations was to accelerate the abandonment program or to look at divesting of that business unit. So I believe we have started the marketing of that business unit, and we'll see what comes of that to decide, if it's going to sell or not. But currently, just recently, we set up 2 new reserves. One of those reserves was related to an abandonment obligation reserve. And so we put funds aside in this reserve to help pay for some of those abandonment costs. We know that those are going to be ongoing, not only for our oil and gas area, but also for other areas within the city. So we have set up a reserve, and we will start using that reserve to pay for some of these abandonment costs going forward. Hopefully that answered the question. If anybody wants to add in, please feel free.
Perhaps just add one more comment, Lola, and it's recognizing that it's not an either or, that really what we're attempting to propose under an MCC is an opportunity with the addition of the skill-based board and a focus on the energy business, that we might be able to drive improved scrutiny and decision-making at the energy business level, where we can seek to deliver on average improved dividends through time back to the city. So we're hoping to drive in a bigger sum of the parts rather than current state. We do know that we are challenged longer term through current state with or without the MCC, but we are hoping to improve from our current outlook with the MCC for improved returns. Those returns through those dividends would then flow back to the city, who can then apply it against some of those abandonment requirements.
Okay, thank you, guys. We do have another question that's been published. What about the salaries for the MCC? How much is this going to cost over currently paid staff? MD Pancoast, I'll probably leave that one with you.
Sure, thank you. That is another common question. There's this expectation for whatever, probably because we see it in some of the other larger MCCs, where we don't see what the overall compensation is for the broad staff group, but it is published what the officers of those entities do make. And in some cases, it is into the millions, whether it's base salary plus bonuses plus stock offerings or whatever it may be. Those numbers do add up pretty fast. However, our context locally is very different. The example of NMAX or others of that nature, they are multi-jurisdictional, they are multinational. NMAX is beyond just Calgary. They've expanded into Maine. They are a very diversified entity, a very sophisticated, very mature, much larger than we are at the city. Our intent under the MCC is to retain our exemption under the Electric Utilities Act, and that actually limits our franchise area to our current scope, focused on the city of Medicine Hat plus Redcliffe and surrounding areas of Cypress County. That means that we aren't going to be as big, sophisticated, complex as the NMAXs of the world, so we won't be required to attract and retain that level of talent at either the board level or the officer level. We are able to continue with the staff we have, or perhaps subject to board decisions, change out the officer level as needed for what our needs are. But today we do market data-based benchmarking as to what it takes for the scope of our roles today. I fully anticipate that type of approach will continue going forward, and there wouldn't be a requirement to pay officers, which really is the executive and leadership team of an MCC, any different than what is addressed today, because we're able to reasonably attract and retain for the scope of skills and services that we require. And we don't see any need for that to change going forward. And a board wouldn't be motivated to incur unnecessary expense if they can attract and retain the level of staff required to do what the city is asking of them.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions floating in at this time. Is there anything the project team felt would be helpful to add for additional information?
Sure, perhaps just to give people time if there are additional questions. Another common question that we do get is that challenge of, aren't we losing control if we move to an MCC world? And yes, there is a sense of it wouldn't necessarily be council directly making some of those decisions. There is a certain level of autonomy required under an MCC model. However, guardrails are plentiful. The MCC still is owned by the city, reports financials and performance back to the city, provides the dividend back to the city. The board is appointed by city council. If the board goes sideways, city council can change out the board. And if the MCC itself starts going sideways, the city has the option to unwind the MCC. Plus, for regular operations, there is the guiding governing documents. And perhaps for that and to supplement, I'll turn it over to Matt to speak further about unanimous shareholder agreements and more governing elements for those appropriate checks and balances.
And just FYI, there is another question, Rochelle, but let's wrap this one up first before we proceed to that one.
Thank you. As Rochelle said, there are some guardrails and other governance documents in place. The directors and officers would have a duty to act in the best interest of the corporation in compliance with the Business Corporations Act and the governance documents. And three of the key ones would include the Articles of Incorporation, which would establish the share structure and things like that. A general bylaw, which would impose restrictions on the director's power to borrow funds through the MCC. And then the unanimous shareholder agreement, which deals with things like material changes. So anytime the MCC wanted to undertake something that would constitute a material change, and the definition in the Municipally Controlled Corporations regulation is quite broad, there'd be a compulsory public engagement requirement, which the Medicine Hat City Council would have to follow. So the proposed material change would have to be advertised. The residents would have to be given an opportunity to make representations regarding that proposed material change. And then the city would have to summarize the feedback received through those public representations and provide them to the corporation. And ultimately, any material change would be subject to the decision of City Council as the sole shareholder.
Thank you, Matt. So we have had a couple of questions roll in. So the strategy of just continuing to offer some content while we give people a chance to think seems to be paying off. So the next question that I have for the group, I'm not quite certain who would be the best person to answer it. If administration can control an MCC that manages a utility, why can't they simply manage the utility? And what I presume to be a very tongue-in-cheek remark at the end is that too much work nowadays?
I can start, but happy to have the project team fill in as well. And Travis, I might queue you up to offer some examples of where you've run into some unique challenges, because you've had industry background experience as well. But I think the reality is we do, as staff, we do our best to run the best we can within the parameters and expectations of our governing structure, recognizing that council does approve our budgets as any board would look to approve budgets, but the construct of how we are set up as an organization is driven primarily as a municipality, and where possible, we do make exceptions for the energy business. But it is a little bit like putting a square peg in a round hole. It's not always easy to mesh the two. There is a difference in risk tolerance. Often municipalities have a very low risk tolerance, whereas energy, and particularly when we were in oil and gas, you might have to drill 5 wells to get one that actually produces well. So you might get the odd dry hole, and that's okay because that's the reality of the business. We have similar types of risks on the electric side. Distribution is a little bit easier. It tends to be a lower risk area. However, these days it is no longer low risk. We have a relatively small market with lots of lumpiness in our growth. It can be harder to plan for when we might need that next substation or access to gas supplies. And it's difficult to try to take the level of risk in some of that planning that we might otherwise need to in a municipality. We also have to recognize that our decision-making processes will be in the context of the broader public who may or may not know about some of our complexities. And in fact, council doesn't always know about some of our complexities. So the idea of should staff continue and drive what we need to drive? Sure. But even I'll argue it's not the best governance model. If we are the ones educating new council members on what the energy business is about, and then we also become the advisor and recommender of what we should be doing, and we tend to know more about the business than council, they don't necessarily feel equipped to be asking the right questions, or if they are asking questions, they tend to trust our answer. And that's poor governance in my view. There's an opportunity to layer in a fit for purpose skill-based board who can really both challenge staff to make sure we're moving in the right direction, but strategize with staff to make sure we're moving in the right direction. That would be better governance for an energy business. I recognize there is value as a community energy business, but it is a very, very complex and sophisticated area that is growing in complexity. We're in the middle of an entire market redesign for our electricity business. We're facing net zero regulations for our electricity business by 2050 with practical purposes as if it was 2035. We're facing energy transition considerations. There's a host of uncertainties, and trying to educate and advise and get decisions through council, who tends to change every 4 years, can be difficult for the long-term sustainability of the business. So yes, we will always do our best in whatever the model is. As possible, council will say no to the MCC, and we'll continue to work to do our best. But I'll throw it over to Travis for some additional thoughts.
Yeah, not sure if I have much more to add. Definitely wanted to reinforce the point on in my previous career in private industry, the ability for that board of directors to provide a strategic approach for the business and really, be in the industry and understand different avenues that we may be able to go, or the risks that we're facing and different headwinds, and be able to guide us through that is definitely a significant advantage that skilled-based board can offer for us.
Okay, thank you both. We do have some more questions rolling in. I also understand there might be some people we have had a participant who's trying to submit a question unsuccessfully. But perhaps we were able to see the message that you sent, so perhaps you can just submit your question there rather than in the Q&A field, and we'll attempt to relay it to the project team. But in the meantime, I will put forward this question to the group, and this one might be best directed at Tori, I'm thinking, as the project manager, and if I'm wrong, Tori, please defer it to someone else. But what would be the time, what would the time frame be for implementation? How long before the MCC is functional? And what happens to city staff after the transition?
Thanks, Colleen. I think the answer to the first question is the general time frame for the if it's decided to proceed with the MCC formation in late June, it's approximately 1 year estimated as the time for implementation, and that would be the similar answer for how long. The second question, how long before the MCC is functional, would be about that same time frame. And then what happens to city staff after the transition? The city staff that would be parts of the department within the departments that would become part of the MCC would remain in their positions and do their jobs as normal, likely in the same places. There'd be a number of other city staff that support the MCC business that would continue to support the business through what are being referred to as shared service agreements between the city and the MCC for support services.
Okay, thanks, Tori. I do have another question here related to the interim commodity rate. So I'm thinking, Travis, this one is likely best directed to you. So there's currently an interim commodity rate at the moment that sets a floor and a ceiling power price. Will that change? And would City Council have the ability to set guidelines on local rates?
Yeah, so for now, that initial interim rate will be effect up until the MCC is approved and implemented. At that time, it would be up to the MCC to propose rates to the rate review committee. The rate review committee then would review the rates, commodity and distribution rates, and determine the fairness and the applicability of those rates. But it would be up to the MCC to prefer or to propose new rates, potential for fixed rates, variable rates, as the city's had in the past, to help guide or be similar to the remainder of Alberta. But that's subject to what is recommended by the skill-based board of the MCC.
Thanks, Travis. So this is perhaps a really difficult question for the group to answer, but I'll throw it out there and see if anyone has any thoughts. But I will caution that they would be probably anecdotal and difficult to back with any specific evidence. How do you perceive support for this project, or pardon me, how do you perceive support for this as of now? What percentage of Hatters want this?
Good question. And I would say when we have engaged, we've been connecting with a number of people who've already made up their mind, and yet may or may not have the understanding of what the intention, the characteristics of what it is and what it isn't. They may have been considering some of the assumptions. I think part of our challenge is to try to cut through some of those early assumptions and fears and to offer facts of intention of what this is trying to achieve and not achieve, and specifically how with respect to the governance. So it's hard to say. We've heard some louder voices in pockets, but what we haven't heard is the broader view of the community, and that's, I think, part of what we're attempting to seek is a more informed view ahead of the public hearing. The public hearing is the opportunity for the public to feed their thoughts to council as to whether they support or they reject and why, what their thinking is, so that council can hear that. And our hope is that it's not just some select voices being representative of the community, but that it be a broader group from the community to help share their thoughts with council as they consider this decision.
Okay, thanks. I don't see anyone else jumping in to offer some thoughts on that one, so I'll move on to the next question. I think, Lola, this one is likely best handled by you. How will the startup costs of the MCC affect taxes? Where is the startup money coming from? And would it be possible for citizens to purchase individual shares in the MCC to receive dividends individually or have dividends applied to reduce our taxes?
Okay, startup costs of the MCC, we're not anticipating that is going to impact property taxes. We haven't really looked into this, but the assumption is that it would be either funded through the Energy Transition Reserve or be funded by the business units that are moving over to the newly created MCC. And then the second question about whether citizens will be able to purchase individual shares. The way the dividends are going to work is that it will come from the MCC to the city. So the city will, excuse me, the city will receive those dividend funds. And then it would be up to council and administration to decide where those dividends are going to be applied for. Are they going to go into our reserves? They could potentially go back to help reduce taxes, but that will have to be analyzed at that point in time to see where are these funds required or needed when we do that review at that point in time.
Thanks, Lola. I have a couple questions related to the public hearing, which I can maybe try answering myself, and then if there's others from the group that want to supplement, please do so. The first question is, should the public bring case studies or examples in other municipalities? I would suggest that the information that people bring forward in a public hearing, it's certainly appropriate if they want to cite some information from other municipalities. The second question is related to how much time people will get to engage during the public hearing. And I wanted to answer that one in collaboration with the first question related to the public hearing, because I think that might be the biggest imposition would be typically a participant in a public hearing has 5 minutes. So please, anyone from the project group, let me know if I've got any of that inaccurately. So if there is a desire to bring forward information or examples from other municipalities, it would still need to occur within that time constraint. Perhaps City Solicitor Bullock, I could look to you to see if there was any other information related to that, or if I got anything inaccurate.
Sure. Thanks, Colleen. No, you're correct about that. So each speaker would be given 5 minutes to speak. The public hearing would be run just like any other public hearing. There's procedures for public hearings set out in our procedure bylaw that will be followed. So people can have an opportunity to speak whatever they want to present. They have 5 minutes, and then council would have an opportunity to ask questions of the speaker or of staff at the end of it. So you're right.
Okay, and we do have another question here. This again, I could forward to anyone on the project team, I think. The available document is 109 pages of highly technical and jargon-heavy information. Where can people find a simpler document written for people without expertise in the fields? Managing Director Pancoast, perhaps I'll ask you to start with that one.
It's a great question. I think that's highlighting some of the challenge that we, even as administration, have been faced with, is how to simplify really complex areas in a way that's readily understood and attainable, not just for the public, but also for council. It's not easily done, even trying to explain in the disclosure documents, which is a regulatory requirement to have the disclosure documents in order to proceed towards the public hearing as a potential path if we do proceed with the MCC. And I think we're always looking for opportunities to improve in that area. It is a common challenge, how to describe our business in a way that simplifies to the point without losing the actual essence of what we're trying to achieve is one of the challenges we have. But I'll ask if anyone else has thoughts, perhaps even from the communications team. Colleen, if you have any thoughts on that. We're continually trying to improve in this area. And it is a challenge. I acknowledge that.
Yeah, I don't think I have much further to add, Rochelle, other than just agreeing that it is certainly a challenge. This is a highly technical area that is very complex, nuanced, and impacted by numerous external and internal factors. It does prove to be a very significant communications challenge. We're certainly doing our best to try and make information accessible to the community, but we fully acknowledge it's a difficult one. I contemplate quite frequently how council members and administration have an opportunity to sit through hours and hours of presentations, and it takes a long time to get up to speed, and it's very difficult to find sound bites and snippets of information that are going to contribute to meaningful understanding within the community. It's certainly one of our most significant challenges.
No, it's just that I had one more comment on that one. Perhaps there was a two-page, a much more condensed piece of information, two-page handout prepared for one of the public sessions. I believe that was, something that's available, provides a little bit simpler, obviously simpler information.
Thank you for that, Tori. I just published a question that was a bit of a follow-up, I believe, for the original asker, and you may have just answered it for them. It says, I realize you need the document as a regulatory requirement. I am talking about a second document. So I would encourage everyone who's online, we do have about 20 people with us today, to go ahead and visit the city's Shape Your City website. There are some resources there that are more accessible and break things down in a simpler format. So we don't have any other questions waiting to be answered that are germane to the discussion today. Oh, one more just popped in. Did you mail anything out? I can answer that one. There has not been a general mailer related to this topic. No, not as of yet. It's been broadly covered through council meetings, news releases, social media, digital communications via our email marketing tools, and to all of our subscribers and such. But no, there has not been a direct mailer to the community. I'm not seeing further questions, but I'm just, watching the feed and giving it an opportunity to refresh.
Maybe just to see if there's any more coming through, if there's anyone else from the project team. And obviously there's a broader team even than this core who is represented today. I really just want to thank the project team for all the extra efforts here. It is a bit challenging to try to reach into the community on a challenging and complex topic with a relatively short time frame. We will continue to do what we can in this area. So there are the additional materials on Shape Your City. There's opportunity for the Q&A there as well. And we'll certainly do our best to answer questions as they come through that avenue. But perhaps for the project team, if there's anything else that you've been hearing in terms of key questions that are worth repeating for this audience, happy to open it up to the floor as well.
If I could interject as well, Rochelle, I would like to remind all of our participants that on that Shape Your City page, you'll find a video link to the presentation that was provided to City Council. I believe it's probably a 60 to 90-minute commitment to watch that video, but it does provide a very comprehensive view of the proposal and where we've been and where we're proposing to go. So I would encourage everyone who is online, if they haven't had the opportunity to see that presentation, it's an excellent resource. Perhaps I see that our moderator has put that online for everybody today to sort of point out where that's at on the Shape Your City page. It might also be appropriate at this time to pull up the slide that highlights the details about the public hearing, as that will be our community's official opportunity to provide some feedback on the proposed plan.
While that is occurring, I was just reminded that another key assumption that has come from pockets of the community is that introducing an MCC is simply a means to a sales. That's not actually the case. You do not require an MCC even to consider a sale. We did look at the possibility of valuing what our electric generation asset had been by exploring sale potential in the past within our existing legal structure. We're in the midst of exploring the possible value and comparing that against our other options for our natural gas production business within our existing legal model without that being in a separate legal entity. So if anything, the work that KPMG opted to focus on to help identify the ways to deliver best value from the energy business for the benefit of our community was to look at three options. One was status quo governance structure, one was to look at the MCC, and one was to look at a sale. The sale was actually outright rejected because of the value of our exemption under the Electric Utilities Act. That would be at risk if we were to look at a sale. However, under an MCC, we are able to retain our exemption and retain that value for the benefit of our community, while also seeking to improve the value of the energy business along the way. So no, it's not intended as a means to an end towards a sale. That isn't even we don't require an MCC to look at that, and more so we've outright rejected that as the option that we'd be interested in pursuing. We're wanting to retain the value and lean into an MCC to improve the overall success long-term of the energy business.
And if I may supplement, thank you, Rochelle. And as Rochelle mentioned, sale would be a possibility within the city's existing structure. And actually, a sale could be done without formal public engagement. It would be at the discretion of council, whereas if the energy business were transferred in, or these components of the energy business were transferred into a municipally controlled corporation, any sale would be treated as a material change, and that would engage the mandatory public engagement requirements that we outlined earlier. So the MCC has an additional level of public transparency that's mandated by statute when it comes to things like sale. And then through the governance documents, there'll be restrictions on share issuances, share transfers. It would all be a council decision, no different than it is today.
Okay, we have published another question. I think, again, this is perhaps directed to Lola. How much information will an MCC deliver to the public, and will we get more detailed financial documents?
Yeah, so the MCC will be required to create their own financial statements. They will be required to be audited by an external auditor. They will then, as any company reporting to a shareholder, they will be responsible for reporting back to council with their financial statements and performance and, you know, operational highlights and that sort of thing. So those will be in an open council setting. Within the city, when we're consolidating the MCC in the city financial statements, it is going to be on the more of a modified method, which means it will be very limited information that's coming over. However, the accounting standards say that we do need to include additional disclosure or additional notes within our financial statements, highlighting certain components of the MCC and the performance of that business unit. So there will be more information coming forth.
Don't go anywhere yet, Lola. Will there be a forensic audit before/while creating the MCC?
Yeah, so when we're setting up the new MCC, we will have legal consultation as well as accounting consultants to help us create that MCC. So whether there'll be an audit, I suppose there will be some kind of, maybe not necessarily a full-blown audit. Our thought is that we would, if it's approved, that it would start probably mid next year, where we would start creating the entity. So at that point in time, we would have just finished our year-end audit. And then based on the information that is included within each of the business units, and based on the legal and external accounting advice or direction that we get, then we would start setting up that entity as is. But all the information would be, would have already gone through an audit process. So I don't believe that we would do a further audit at that point in time.
Thanks,
There-
Lola.
Yeah, there is an additional cost to doing audits. And of course, we want to be mindful of how, the cost of setting up an entity. There is going to be initial costs already. And so we don't want to add to those costs either. And if we have the information available, then we will, that should be sufficient to set up the entity at that point in time.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the review. Though we do have a reminder that of the distinction between an audit and a forensic audit, and the specialized focus of of a forensic audit. Oh, and I'm seeing one more question that I'll go ahead and publish. How will you make sure all of the assets are valued correctly?
Yeah, I can take that one. So right now, through our regular audit process, the intent is that the existing assets that we currently have on the books today will be transferred over to the MCC at the net book value. So we feel like we do a review on an annual basis to make sure that if there are any impairments within our assets or anything like that, that we would write them off or write them up. So that is being done on an annual basis and is being audited through our external auditors. So we feel that currently how we're reflecting our assets for the city and within the MCC business units are representative of what the net book value is.
Just one other comment. It might be important to note that there is no cash moving in regards to these assets, as the MCC is 100% owned by the City of Medicine Hat. It's a book exchange of assets that the Municipal Controlled Corporation will have transferred to it.
Yeah, good point, Travis. We will be transferring cash over to the MCC, or they will take the cash that is within those business units. Of course, they need cash to operate as well. And one of the assumptions that we put in the initial documents is that we would also transfer over the energy transition reserve to the MCC, again, helping that MCC get established. And, they're going to need funds in order to do their capital and their maintenance type programs.
And we have a follow-up on that question. Would you do that same procedure if you were buying at arm's length?
That's a great question. This is the guidance that we have from KPMG. And again, we would get additional expertise from our accounting consultants when we set up the MCC. So because it is a separate entity, we looked at, do we do fair value of the assets, or can we transfer them at net book value? And through the initial analysis that we did, it was determined that we didn't have to revalue them at fair value, that we could, or market value, that we could just transfer them over at net book value, and it keeps things simple.
Thank you, Lola. And I have another question. It may be you or Managing Director Pancoast may wish to weigh in as well. If you were to buy an external company, would you be doing a more intense audit of their books before buying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've gone through that process with some of our purchases when we did the oil and gas businesses that we had procured. And we do our due diligence. We look at everything. We would definitely do an audit of their books and make sure that everything was in order and were valued appropriately before we took it on. This is a little bit different where we're not buying an external company. We are setting up an entity, a separate entity that it was part of the city and is now really just broken out into a separate entity. So it's still part of the city corporation. It's just being, moved off to a separate entity. But it's not that we're purchasing anything differently.
And if I'm
Oh, you're muted, Rochelle, or you're not coming through.
sorry, can you hear me now? Thank you. And perhaps if I'm reading between the lines, there's an implied question of why isn't the new MCC purchasing the assets and giving that cash back to the city? But in a sense, by simply slicing off the assets and cash to set up the new entity, that's the shareholder contribution for which the shareholder, as the 100% owner being the city, then gets the dividends through time going forward. And they still own all of those assets because they own the company. So it is a different situation, and we are fully familiar with those assets, the value of those assets, how those numbers come to be, because we prepare those financial reports for those businesses on a monthly and triannual basis, and those are audited as part of our processes. So we're already very familiar. We don't need to do the additional due diligence like we would if it was an unknown entity. And really, the city still owns all those assets. If ever the MCC was to unwind, those assets would return to the city.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rochelle. The city will be kept whole really because we are going to be showing that investment in the MCC on our balance sheet. And so really nothing significantly changes on the city side.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions, and we are a little bit past the 6 o'clock mark. So perhaps if I could ask the moderator again to put up that public hearing information. So we really appreciate everyone who took the time today to come out and submit their thoughtful questions. The next step, as Rochelle mentioned, will be, or the community's next opportunity to engage with this will be at the public hearing on Tuesday, June 24th. As a reminder, you can do written submissions that will be included in the council agenda if they're received by the city clerk's office before June 17th. If you're not able to submit before June 17th, your submissions will still be received by City Council. They just won't necessarily be included in the agenda packet that gets released prior to the meeting. So with that, if there aren't any further questions, I'll allow the project team if there were any final thoughts that might have been missed or whatnot that we want to close with. But again, thank you to everyone for their participation today. And we have a thank you coming in from the crowd. You're absolutely welcome. Again, I encourage all of you to visit that Shape Your City site. There are a lot of really excellent resources there that you can use to become more informed. And again, that public hearing is on Tuesday, June 24th at 4 p.m. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.